matter what you say to me, it's just another erase, and I'm tired of the lies you tell me. Lies you tell me.
All right, my friends, it is Steve with Real Progressives. Tonight, we're going to talk about something that I probably should have talked about way before now, but it's going to happen tonight. So, the idea of parroting what you hear, it's a good thing to practice, to learn new language, to repeat what you hear on the Rosetta Stone, recordings, etc. But it's really important, if you want to learn a language, to actually dig in and understand the language. And when it comes to modern monetary theory and economics, it's another language. And it requires more than just repeating, taxes don't fund spending. And unfortunately, we've got some friends in the movement that are like Polly want a cracker. And, they might come into a debate 20 comments deep. Maybe there's some history. And they'll see Grumbine drop a, taxes don't fund spending, you moron, or something like that. Bad form, Grumbine, bad form. But that's what they see. And so the repeat of that is, taxes don't fund spending, you moron. And then it's like, hey, I just pulled a Grumbine, man. I just took him down Grumbine style. And it's like, that's not exactly what I was looking for there, brother, sister, whoever. To me, it's really important. And it took me years. Folks, I want you to understand. It took me years to get to the point where I truly understood a lot of the concepts of MMT. It did not happen for me overnight. In fact, I had to do a lot of reading. I think some of the most troubling discussions I ever had were on the most basic things. Like, what is a dollar? I could not get it in my head what a frickin' dollar was. I kept thinking it was that piece of paper, but I had to learn. I had to really dig in. But I also had the desire to dig in. And so I read everything I could get my hands hold of. I read every New Economics Perspective article out there. I read the 6-part series on replying to critics of MMT. I read L. Randall Wray's entire primer. I read Mosler's Seven Innocent Deadly Frauds of Economic Policy. I read a whole host of books. Too many to name now. But I also read a boatload of Levy Institute white papers and a lot of the other white papers that are out there. You find them on any of the academic, database searches, like Scribd and other things like that. Now, some of these have a paywall, and there's some ways around that, which we can talk about later. But the bottom line is that there's an incredible amount of information out there. We're not talking about just some bumper sticker that Grumbine screams, taxes don't fund federal spending. Now, it's a great, party favor, if you will. It's a great icebreaker. But you've got to be able to explain what that means. It means so much more than just, hey, your taxes don't pay for that. Although that may be true. People start asking a lot of other questions. Now, if you know the answers to the follow-ups, well, that's a different story altogether. But there's a lot of people that stopped short and just started and stopped with taxes don't fund spending. And they never advance beyond that. And they'll be in a chat, they'll be in a conversation, they'll be talking in mixed company. And then they sound like a broken record. And, I get it. Fake it till you make it. But there's no substitute for doing the work. There's no substitute for doing the reading. There's no substitute for engaging in conversations about the societal impacts, about understanding the structure, about understanding balance sheets and ledgers. This is very important stuff. And the more you know, the more you can say things in a way that is more fitting to your personality. In other words, You don't want to be robotic. You don't want to just be a parrot that just repeats and regurgitates without understanding. So, one of the things that jumped out at me when I didn't understand this whole concept of federal taxation not funding spending, for example, Stephanie Kelton had this great white paper. And I'm going to show it to you in a second. It's called, her name was Stephanie Bell at the time. It says, Do Taxes and Bonds Finance Government Spending? And this right here is quite a lengthy document. I can scroll through this. And you start getting into this thing, right? And this is dense reading. Very, very dense reading. And you go through this whole paper. From they have literally broken this thing down to the most minute detail. And it is absolutely sourced. And it breaks down things that you've probably, I don't know, you probably never heard. You've never heard from me. You've never heard from a lot of people, because this level of detail is usually way over the average person's head. But this document right here is 19 pages long, and Kelton wrote it back when she was going for her PhD, and this was her final, if you will, final paper. And, ultimately it comes in and it says, bottom line, it's absolutely impossible for taxes and bonds to finance government spending. Now, you look at this detailed thing and you start asking yourself, wow, so this one little statement, federal taxes don't fund spending, where did that all come from? Well, it came from a lot of places. It wasn't just some random thing somebody came up with in their head and just sort of spewed out. It goes back to 1946 with Beardsley Rummel. It actually probably went back further than that. But in documentation form, we got Beardsley Rummel in 1946 talking about taxes for revenue are obsolete. And then you look across the board, really. You can go into some areas where it's not perfectly MMT, like the monetary sovereignty area with Roger Malcolm Mitchell. And he breaks down what monetary sovereignty is. And he talks about the difference between the federal and the states, the currency issuer versus the currency user. And you can look at that all the way through Warren Mosler's book, Seven Deadly Innocent Frauds. But you've got to marry all this information up. And then when you net it out and you come up with your verbiage, you realize at the end of the day, chasing dollars in a fiat economy, chasing tax dollars to pay for things, is a loser. First of all, it's incorrect. It's incorrect to believe that the nation's broke and all that stuff, but it really is a deep dive, and it requires you doing the reading to get past, the objections, because as you walk through this stuff, you got to understand the people you're sitting across from, maybe many of them haven't heard of MMT. But they certainly have heard of the creature from Jekyll Isle, and they've certainly done their digging, because for whatever reason, people do more for a lie than they do for the truth. But they've done their homework, even if it's completely incorrect information, or at least totally skewed. And they end up with this long list of questions, long list of statements, many of which, if you did the homework, you would be able to answer, you'd be able to debunk. But instead, we see a lot of our activists literally stopping short, and they don't follow through. They don't know the next answer. They really don't know MMT. They haven't learned MMT. They've learned a few bumper stickers. I'd like to believe that I've tried to go through a lot of this stuff. I've had experts come on to go through this stuff, but it takes a lot of reinforcement. MMT on its own it's an incredibly dense, large body of knowledge that marries up with a lot of information from the post-Keynesians and a lot of information from Abel Lerner and functional finance, and of course Minsky and Michael Koleski and others. I mean, there's an incredible amount of dense reading to be an expert and to really know MMT, to learn MMT. Eric Timonet has a great banking primer. So does Scott Fulweiler. And so there's a ton of stuff out there that shows you how banks work, how the money traces across the balance sheets. It's not easy doing reserve accounting, but it's there to learn. It's right there. And once you understand it, you're not going to have the same questions that you do today. And while you're going through your reading, there's plenty of resources right here at RP, and of course within the entirety of the modern monetary theory community. There are tons of people out there. If you don't like the way one person says it, there's somebody else that'll say it the way you want to hear it. But the truth is the truth is the truth. And it's important because I've talked about this before, but I think it's important to frame it. When Roseanne Barr came back on the air not too long ago, her and her sister were debating Medicare for all. Of course, Roseanne mocked, the only problem with socialism is eventually you run out of other people's money. So there's economics eking into sitcoms. Now, if you don't think that the millions of people that sat there and heard Roseanne tell her sister, the only problem with your Medicare for all is eventually you run out of other people's money, you're crazy. The aesthetic, the humanities, the arts, all that stuff reflects the crazy misunderstandings of economics. So for you to be able to wade into that deep end, for you to be able to really help people out of the dark, out of the forest, you've got to do that homework. There is no shortcut to doing the homework. I wish there was, because believe me, I would have taken it a long time ago. I mean, there's still things I'm learning. I'm no expert. I may know more than some, but I don't know more than all. And I think it's really important to understand this because let's talk about this for a minute. Look at socialists, okay? I was talking to a friend prior to this live stream. I've done more interactions with socialists over the last decade than I care to admit. And with socialists, you've got a problem. You walk in the door and they've already got that cup filled to the rim with brim. They already know everything there is to know, and they're there to teach you. They're not interested in being taught. This is a problem because Marx has given them their fullness. That's all they want to know. They believe that money doesn't need to exist in a socialist economy, so money's the root of all evil, so they don't want to hear about money. They don't want to hear about how a fiat currency works. They've got their mind made up that it's all about capital flight, which doesn't exist in a modern money economy, where you've got a free-floating fiat currency. A lot of the things that they put forward are things that were written, Marx had no way of knowing these things. Isn't that the crap on Marx? It's just the crap on people that short-circuited the process. They didn't finish reading all of Marx's work, and they think that once they have done it, that they don't need to learn how the monetary system works. They're not unique, though. Unfortunately, Democrats have grown used to their own flavor of this, too, that they parrot back and forth. Of course, the price for living in civilized society is we pay taxes so we can have roads and this and that. Sounds good in theory, right? And then you look over at Republicans, and they have come to believe that this debt is the scariest thing of all time. They don't understand that either. But they've got their own religious ethos that they follow. There's all these groups out there that have these religions that block their cognition from obtaining new information. Because what does it mean if I accept this thing that MMT says Can I still identify as a socialist? Can I still identify as a teabagger? Can I still identify as a Trekkie? Whatever. They have this crisis that hits, this crisis of identity. For me, I just identify as an MMT progressive. Okay? Now, do I favor socialist policies? Most times, a lot of times. All times, no. Because I come from a different school. The school I come from is Marx didn't know about MMT. So I want to live in a society where decisions are informed by the truth, not informed by things that are no longer valid. And so I leave open the space for, I don't know what tomorrow will bring, but I do know that our basic needs have to be met. I do know the balance between labor and capital is completely skewed. I do know a lot of things like that. But that's not MMT. That's politics. That's theology. That's beliefs. That's your value system, if you will, coming forward in some school of thought. MMT is not a value system. MMT is a description of the way currency works in a free-floating fiat currency. And it would describe any kind of money wherever it's at. So when people reject MMT, it's because they don't know it. They don't know what they're saying. They don't know what they're saying no to. And it doesn't help when the activists that claim to know MMT haven't done the reading yet. And they can't answer those tough follow-up questions. Those tough follow-up questions are the ones that seal the deal. Once you show the person unequivocally, think about some of the most horrible conspiracies that keep us down out there have enough truth in them that it's difficult to debunk if you don't have some serious information backing it up. Take the banks, for example. Some of this stuff is really important to hear. For example, there's that saying that 97% of the money in circulation today is bank money. Well, how did that come to be? This is a whole history lesson wrapped up into a lot of other little mini situations that occurred along the way. You oftentimes hear us talking about neoliberalism. Well, the conflation of pushing us to private credit, the financialization of our economy and our world, the imbalance between labor and capital, and the massive private debt that is drowning out society, all kind of have their own storyline. But you put them all together and it explains perfectly why so much of our economy is filled with bank money. Unfortunately, people just as off-putting as the MMTer that screams, taxes don't fund spending, but I don't know anything beyond that, is the person on the other side who has decided to substitute the pursuit of truth with a conspiracy, a Rothschild conspiracy, or some other worthless bullshit story from the fire pit. They want to end the fractional reserve system. Well, what is the fractional reserve system? What is the idea? How do banks make loans? And their answers are out there. Cutting it down, banks are not reserve constrained. Reserves are a tool that are used to help clear payments. They're interbanking dollars and they never leave the banking system. Banks don't lend reserves. Why don't they lend reserves? Because reserves never leave the banking system. Reserves are like a placeholder for the other side of the balance sheet when you're doing money creation. When Congress spends, reserves are created. These reserves have to be purged out because what is a dollar? A dollar is a tax credit. So in order for the dollar to become whole, It's got to die, so to speak. It goes out into the world, does its thing, comes back home, finds its reserve, and then they go kaput. They get cleared out. That reserve is a placeholder for that dollar. Two sides of the balance sheet. And so when banks don't have reserves, they go out on the open market and they get reserves that they need. They do whatever they have to do to get the reserve balances they need. But banks are not constrained to lending based on reserves. It's important to go out there and read some of these banking primers. It's important to know that the fractional reserve system ended in 1934, back when the original gold standard ended. It's important to know what that means. It's important to understand what not being on the gold standard means. It's important to understand what a peg in your currency means. If you're pegging the value of your dollar to cotton, or pegging the value of your dollar to a weight of gold, if I can force demand my deposit back in the commodity in which it's pegged, do you have enough of that gold laying around for me to, claim all my gold back? So they started realizing there was a lot of limitations that came with these pegs and different things. But that's all in the reading, right? This is stuff you've got to do the reading on. You've got to understand that France is famous for fucking economies up. France, going back to the Treaty of Versailles, they kind of, really took it down on the Germans before even Hitler was around, demanding payment only in French francs and gold, etc., completely kneecapping the German, the entire country, quite frankly. And then you look here in the United States, and the French started demanding that their debt, when they would buy stocks and bonds and stuff, they would demand that their payment be in gold. And that's when Tricky Dick said, okay, I think we've seen this script before. We're going to jump off this and we're going to go to a free-floating fiat currency. And we're going to end this Bretton Woods Accord. But this is all fun reading. This is all stuff that's out there. Now, not all sources are created the same. Not all sources are created the same. This is the God's honest truth. It's important to read trusted material. Material from people who have done the work, that understand. Yes, I would be pointing at the MMT economists and those bloggers that support the MMT community. They have done the most thorough research. They have done the hard work. Don't make it wasted. Read it. Ingest it. Go into our MMT for Real Progressives group and start talking about it. I'm shocked at how many activists that are MMTers spend their time in groups that are not MMT for RP. And they do not learn MMT, and they go out there and they just say taxes don't fund spending. And then they throw the dummy in there. And it's like, that's not going to win the day, gang. Listen, I've been doing this too long, probably. But I've been doing this for almost 10 years. There's certain debates that I've had that I am absolutely sick of having anymore. It's time for the next crop of people to step up and do some hard work. Know the answers and step in, because, man, oh man, my skin's thin when it comes to having to talk about the private Federal Reserve. I'm over it. Over it. But I've done the homework. Okay? It really is important to be able to make these changes stick in the world around us. It's really important that you do the homework. There are very few things that I have less respect for than people that bring up their beliefs about the way the economy works. I can't help it. I drip with scorn. It's one of the most difficult things for me to get over, to deal with, is people telling me about their beliefs about how the system works, when the reality is it's right there. The reality is painted out, easy to understand, actually. But people will bring these beliefs to the table. And it's very, very hard to disabuse people who are in a faith-based system. You look at the left, you got the Marxists who have a faith-based system that doesn't include MMT. Some of the hardest individuals I've ever worked with in my life to get to understand how our federal finance actually works. How I think Republicans sometimes are easier to reach when it comes to talking about this stuff. But every group has their own blind spots. Unfortunately, some are more religiously addicted to their own blind spots than others. But in order to make the kind of changes that you need to understand this is not really about what you feel. It's not really about what you like. It's not really about whether you think something would be better or not. It's really about understanding how it truly works today. And until you can present the coherent end-to-end, and you don't have to be a scholar to do all this stuff, but you do have to do the legwork. You will not be able to disabuse these religious people. When I say religious, I'm not just talking about, Christians or Muslims. I'm talking about Marxist, because it's a religion for them as well. And I'm talking about these QAnon people. It's a religion for them as well. And I'm talking about Republicans who have bought into this idea of Ayn Rand and libertarians who have bought into all this Ayn Rand stuff. This is not fact-based stuff. This is religion. And so breaking through that is not always just about the logic. You'd like to believe everyone's very logical, but they're not. But balance sheets are easy to see. You can watch the money go from here to there and there to there. You can literally understand that when Congress authorizes spending, keystrokes are added to make deposits into the Treasury's account from the Federal Reserve. Congress authorizes it. The Fed keystrokes it into the Treasury's fund. And then the Treasury writes checks according to the instructions that Congress gave in their bill. That's really as simple as it is. At no point did a tax pay for that spending. However, the question you have to ask yourself is, why does anyone accept that dollar? Why does anyone accept that dollar as payment for their time, for their labor, for goods and services, for their assets, whatever? And it's because the government has imposed a tax, and that tax is payable only in that dollar, in that unit of account. Now, this is all sounds pretty easy, but there's a lot of writing out there. There's a lot of important information out there that fills these voids up so you can understand this thoroughly. Mosler says that when they imposed the first tax, that they created the first unemployed person. They created unemployment by issuing the tax. Because before the tax, people could do whatever they wanted. But once the tax was instituted, you needed to do something to get that dollar. And the government was more than happy to provide you with a job to do back then. Now, we've forgotten that government is in control of that money. We've forgotten that government is the god of that account. And we've substituted it with the false religious belief that it's bank money, that it's the banks doing it. And so by doing that, we've missed the plot altogether. Now, instead of trying to fix Congress so Congress will address the banks, people want to attack the banks. Well, guess what? It's going to take Congress to fix the banks. So just go to the source. Go to the source. The reasons for fighting to truly understand this are noble, and they're valuable. Because without understanding how the system works, we're left as prey when they come and lie and tell us about how broke the country is. When they tell us how impossible everything is, you're left without an answer. And even if you run around yelling taxes don't fund spending, they ask the question, what does fund spending then? It's important not to be a parrot. It's important to have your own story to tell so that you can tell the same thing multiple ways to people. So when you're with somebody who has a different vantage point, that you can meet them at their point of need. It's very, very difficult to not only be in the moment with the person you're debating or discussing with, being able to track where they're at, and trying to shoehorn some bumper sticker phrase of tax don't fund spending. You need to be able to guide them to that understanding that the dollar is nothing more than a tax credit. What does that mean? Well, it's been paid to you by the government. The government spent it into existence. And now, when it finally gets back around to coming back to the government, it's in a form of a tax, and it is deleted from the system. These dollars come and go like crazy. Money supply is elastic. It goes like this. There's no real good way of controlling the money supply because people, when there's not enough money coming through Congress, when there's not enough spending, we have banks that help fill that void by allowing people to have credit. The problem isn't credit. The problem is that what we've done is we've allowed banks to create all kinds of crazy credit, all kinds of crazy predatory credit that in the end people can't pay back and they're trapped. But again, you've got to do the reading. You've got to learn about these things. Because you are the one that is going to change the mind of somebody else you run into. You're the one that has to present that information. I mean, you can always pass them along to somebody else. You can always point to the experts. I oftentimes will say, hey guys, I'm John the Baptist, man. I'm not the Christ. These guys, they're the ones that did all the hard work. I'm just a popularizer. I'm just the guy that's running around telling people, hey, there's this miracle. Here it is. But I also have taken the time. Like in a moment's notice, somebody asks for a resource. I usually can find the article pretty damn quick. And I can get it to somebody very fast. And I have a Rolodex of memes that are great for debate. But the problem is, memes are very, very good conversation starters. But if you can't respond to the deeper questions for them, that's something you really need to think about. Don't get all squirrely. Don't lose confidence. Just know it's very important to have an answer for the hope that lies within. And you need to be able to have those resources at the tip of your fingers, just ready to go. Because you've read them and you know which ones are right. You know, L. Randall Wray wrote a great article, fantastic article, called What Are Taxes Really For? And it's part of his primer series. And it goes into detail about, the role of taxation and why we have a tax-driven economy. That taxes are not revenue. Taxes are just the thing that keeps us needing currency. They're the thing that drives us to work. They're the things that drive us to acquire that currency. It is force of sorts. But it is a necessary force to keep our economy going so that the government can not only provision itself, but we the people can save and have that money have value to it. It's the tax that provides the value. It's the government setting the price that provides the value. It's the fact that the government has agreed to accept your $1 in exchange for $1 in tax credit. But this is all deep dive stuff. You know, we got a meme that's going out on a postcard here soon. And it says a lot of really cool things. It says taxes don't fund spending. And that means that we can never go broke because our government is self-funding, which means we can, A, solve for health care and solve for green energy and solve student debt and the job guarantee and you name it. And it's all true. But I sometimes wonder if people take a moment to even dig deep enough to understand what all that means. Or if they just look at it and say, another money crank, whatever. Some of these memes don't help us. They may feel like they help us, but they don't help us. Because ultimately the goal here has to be to engage people in conversation so that they have a new and improved understanding of how money works, how federal finance works, and how MMT enables or empowers a Green New Deal. I mean, think about this, folks. A Green New Deal? That's huge, right? You've been listening for years that the government is broke and can't afford it. You've been listening to people for years say we got to raise taxes to pay for stuff. And intuitively you've known that there's no way in the world to raise enough taxes to pay for these things. Intuitively you've known that when they blow up the military budget and your taxes didn't go up, that it couldn't possibly be taxation paying for that. But the lie has withstood the test of time, and people are ingrained in that. They don't realize that the idea of taxpayer dollar is a racist, elitist way of making us all eat our peas. It's a racist, elitist way of ensuring the government never has enough money to pay for things because we're protecting taxpayer dollars. And what does a taxpayer look like in the dictionary, in the encyclopedia, etc.? In the lexicon of our brains, what do you think a taxpayer looks like? Do you think it looks like a young African American? Do you think it looks like an old guy with crutches? Do you think it looks like Latina with a Mexico shirt on? No, this is intentional. The taxpayer dollar points back to the wealthy white dude that owns land that has just got the world by the short hairs. That's what your taxpayer looks like in this little game they play. And this is where Margaret Thatcher pushed it. There is no public money. There's only taxpayer dollars. So getting through these lies, it's not just a one and done. You don't just flash up taxes don't fund spending And suddenly everybody goes, oh shit, now they tell me. Now these people are steeped in fibs, steeped in mythology, steeped in all kinds of different bogus storylines that have been told from the fire pit, from a bar stool, hell, from their damn college. So your job is not easy, but it is worthy. And it does start by doing the reading. Now, I used to include a slew of links in every one of the live streams I did. Unfortunately, we haven't been sharing those links of late. We're going to change that soon. Maybe even tonight. Because it's high time that we learn MMT. We've been doing a hashtag Learn MMT for a very, very long time. Very, very, very long time. And many of the people that put hashtag Learn MMT haven't really learned MMT. In fact, they're just parroting what they've heard. And they don't have any idea what the next sentence is. This is not a put down. This is a call to arms. This is a call to do better. Because it's vital that you be able to separate the wheat from the chaff. That you be able to understand when somebody is saying something nutty about banks. That you have an answer. When somebody's saying nutty about debt, you have a real answer. When someone's saying something nutty about the private banks and stuff like that, you have an answer. When they're talking about Glass-Steagall, or they're talking about shadow banking, it's important that you have an answer. It's important that you do the homework. Because these things, they may not seem sexy. They may not seem like the hot ticket. You know, I mean, goodness gracious, you're sitting there looking at Trump and the gang trying to wage war with Iran right now. All of a sudden, the headlines are going to be all about Iran. That doesn't change the fact that you need to understand how the currency works. That doesn't change the fact that we need to teach this, or there'll be no Green New Deal. And more importantly, by not doing the reading and just spitting out tax don't fund spending, you give those tall four-headed jerks room to call it a cult. You give them room to call it a cult, and it's not a cult. It's an incredibly detailed set of understandings about how economics works. You owe it to yourself and to the people that have done the hard work of developing it to read the literature so that you can be an effective warrior to dispel the ignorance that is pervasive in our movement, keeping us stuck from truly having nice things, from truly being able to stave off climate crisis, you name it. Healthcare, highly dependent on you understanding economics. It's not good enough just to parrot these bumper stickers. You must indulge the reading. And it's fun. I'm serious. Once you know this stuff, you're going to feel great. You'll feel solid. You'll feel like you deserve the right to fight for this knowledge you've acquired because you did the hard work. And that's to be commended. So with that, I'm going to ask every one of you to commit to just a few hours a week of reading. Take the time to do the reading. Take the time to watch some of the important videos out there. Take the time to communicate with people about MMT. Don't just drop a stink bomb into a chat saying taxes don't fund spending, although that's a great icebreaker. You need to understand where all that came from. So, with that, I'm going to say goodnight to you all. Hope you had a great weekend. I'm Steve with Real Progressives. Take it easy, everybody.